Wherever you are on your leadership voyage, it starts here.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Leadership Voyage, the podcast dedicated to your pursuit of becoming a great leader. My name is Jason Wick. You can reach the show at startyourvoyage@gmail.com. Visit the website at leadership.voyage. Rate and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Please rate and subscribe. My guest today on Season 2, Episode 6 is Tricia Broderick. And I met Tricia several years ago. She was a facilitator for a training course that I did in Denver. Tricia is the co-author of the recent book, Lead Without Blame, Building Resilient Learning Teams. She co-authored this book with Diana Larson, who is a very well-known author in the Agile software community. In this conversation with Tricia, we talk about teams, and it's one of my favorite topics. We talk about the difference between a group and a team. We talk about when is a group good for work? When do you want a team for work? We talk about some fallacies in the work world, such as leaders needing to have all the answers and everything needs to be efficient. And we dive a little bit into why breaking free from blame is important and instead replacing that with building a resilient learning team. I think you're going to find a lot of value out of this conversation with Tricia. I certainly enjoyed it. Tricia is, in her own words, extremely extroverted, and I think you will feel that come through in the conversation. Before we move on, please remember our friends at Instacart. Following the link in the show notes lets Instacart know that we sent you, help support this show. They have multiple grocery stores available. You can shop from multiple stores in a single order, get the products that you love from local stores, hand-selected by shoppers based on your preferences, with delivery to your door in as fast as 1 hour. Instacart highlights deals that help you save money. They pick the freshest produce, keep your eggs safe too, and I myself am a customer. So without further delay, here's my conversation with Tricia Broderick. Welcome back, everybody. I am here with Tricia Broderick. It is great to see you this morning, Tricia.
Likewise, likewise.
I became aware of you about 5-6 years ago when I was a participant in one of your Leading Amazing Teams workshop. And for dramatic effect, I still have the book right here. And it's staged for right now, but it was in there, and that's the truth. I am really excited to talk to you about your book and other topics because I honestly use tools from that workshop on a weekly basis still in my management life. So thank you for the effect that you and Jake Calabrese, he was the co-facilitator, that you two have had on me.
Thank you. Like, that's awesome to hear. It's like, it's way to start my day off.
Oh, good.
Because that's why we created that course, and why I do what I do is to try and help people have better tools, have better support in what they're trying to accomplish. So it's actually a very lovely thing to hear first thing. I don't take a compliment well, but I'm very grateful.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. And also what's been great is I have passed the tools on to many others, right? Yeah. And so it's just it's a really cool multiplier effect.
We still give it. We only do it like once a quarter, but we still do it together.
That's great to hear. That's awesome. So I reached out to you because you co-authored this book, Leading Amazing Teams, Building Resilient Learning Teams. And teams is one of my favorite topics. So I wanted to start off first by defining team. And I want you to go first. I'll go after you, and then we can take it from there. What is a team?
I think people use that word very, very loosely for a lot of things. And I think a lot of people kind of refer to groups as teams, like people that are willing to cooperate, willing to kind of work together, but in a very coordinated, cooperative, helpful way, but not necessarily in a team way for me. A team is when you're truly starting to collaborate, when you feel this kind of starting to feel a sense of ownership, where you're building off of each other's ideas, where you're depending on each other, where you're engaging with each other intentionally and proactively. And so for me, a team is working together to produce, and not in a cooperative way, but in a collaborative way.
When I think of the definition of team, I think all of the members of this group of people need to share a kind of a purpose, mission, objective, and that the objective they're in pursuit of is more important than any of their individual interests in that context. And I do agree that group is mixed with team quite often.
Yeah, I can get behind. So I really like the last part that you just said with that, because a group could have a common goal, but they each have a part. Right. And so I can be successful in my part, even if we are not successful with a group, with the overall goal. And so I really like that last part that you added on with the team, where no one's part is more important than the overall goal. And that's where that collaboration, that shared ownership really comes in.
And what's a resilient learning team then, if you want to go there?
We started talking about this, and people have always kind of said, you know, a team is great, but a team, there is a dynamic of the leader still often the hub. Right? The leader is still often making sure no balls drop. And to be clear, the leader had to be the hub to get them to team, to get them to move from group to team and things like this. But one of the things that we've always talked about, especially in the Agile community, is the concept of a high performing or a self-organizing team. And that's where the leader's not being the hub. And Diane and I, we've just heard it so many times. Well, do I have a role then as a leader if it's a self-organizing team? And I'm like, well, first of all, it's just ridiculous because they didn't magically become self-organizing. But two, that if you think a team just stays high-performing, that's just precious. Yeah. And so what are you doing to reinforce resiliency? What are you doing to reinforce the learning environment? Because things are going to be constantly changing. If nothing else, 2020 has taught us is chaos is the norm. And what are you doing to really build that dynamic? And that takes concerted effort and proactive, intentional leadership to really lift up and build that type of environment and that type of team.
Great. We're going to dive into a lot of that stuff. Let's rewind a little bit here and again go back to that distinction of group versus team. And now you're putting on top of that the resilient learning team. What does it look like if I'm a part of a group? Like, let's just have everybody who's listening kind of think about what team they're on or what group they're in. What does it look like if I'm a part of a group? What does it look like if I'm a member of a team? What are the differences? What are my experiences like in a different way?
So in a group, I usually like to reference a group as kind of, they act like a relay. They might have that common goal, but it's like, here's my part, let me hand it off. Now you might hear things like, let me help you with your part as long as my part gets done, right? But you're going to get measured on your part, and I'm going to get measured on my part. There are handoffs, there's rewards for individual elements and things along those lines. And unfortunately, most organizations are structured for group dynamics, like hand off to marketing, hand off to sales, hand off to the right. And so we think of that as working together, and it is a form of working together, but it is a very cooperative form. And so at the end of the day, you might get a little bit of help, but you still feel the weight, you still feel the ownership, you still for your part. And it really just lowers people's willingness to be transparent, because why should I tell anybody I'm struggling? Because it's my part, it's my ownership and those things. So a team, you start to really start building things together. And I always kind of like to highlight true collaboration is when you build something with somebody else or multiple people, and it's so much better than you would have ever done. And you're both like exhausted and energized all at the same time. Like that's collaboration where you're feeding off of each other's ideas. And then all of a sudden you come up with a new idea that you never even, and you don't even care whose idea was. Like you don't even remember because you're feeding off of each other. That's like pure collaboration where you're starting to build like your team's co-intelligence. And that gets you better creative results, better innovation, better quality. And that's what you're shooting for, where you don't feel like it's all just falling on your shoulders, where you feel like you're in it with other people. And honestly, that also personally drives me to like do better because I don't want to let my team members down. And so I challenge myself more. I challenge others more in productive ways. A collaborative environment feels more proactively supportive. A group feels probably more reactively supportive.
In the examples that you've called out, hey, I'm struggling now. I need some help. Okay, I'll help you with your part. Okay.
Yes.
No, that's great. And thank you, because what you set up earlier was the distinction between cooperative and collaborative. And I think that's exactly what you're describing. You've used the word several times here. That's great, Tricia. And why are teams so important in today's complex world of work?
Yeah. And a lot of people will ding on groups. And it's like, no, groups can be high performing. That's why I actually struggle sometimes with the word high performing, because a group can be high performing if you have task-based work. And what I mean by task-based work is work that we already know what we're doing. We're not discovering value where we know exactly, so sometimes like a configuration of a system or an installation of very like already known dynamics. Like if you can follow a checklist, you just need a group, okay. Right? But the minute you are in complexity, the minute you have to discover value, the minute you're not exactly sure, you have an idea, but you don't know exactly what you're building, you need that creativity, you need that innovation, you need that discovery. And you can't get that from just cooperation. You really need that collaboration, because that's where the best ideas come out, is in that co-intelligence of the team.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation. And it does serve something you were saying earlier, where when you're truly collaborating and giving it all, and it's draining and rewarding at the same time, the solutions you're coming up with are much greater than what you could do alone, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, like Jake and I collaborated to build that course. There wasn't like a Tricia module and a Jake module, like
right.
It truly, and there are things that either one of us were like, never in our wildest dreams would we have thought to put that in. But together, as we were building that, that's where it came about. Same with the book with Diana. Like that's the power that you gain, because you can discover and go into areas that either one individually might not be able to, but together you can.
Yeah, thanks. And for those listening, in the book, if I recall correctly, you do write a little bit about your collaboration together about the book, kind of in a meta way, right?
We do. We own it. Like, yeah, absolutely.
No, that's great. You talk a little bit earlier about resilient learning teams and this idea of leader as bottleneck. One thing that I like about the book is there are several fallacies that you call out. And I know personally a lot of them spoke to me. I'm sure they'll speak to others. One of the fallacies that you say in the book, you mentioned in the book, is every leader needs to have all the answers. How important, or why is it important to recognize this fallacy? And then what can a leader do to help themselves not be the bottleneck?
Well, we ended up adding in the fallacies because this journey was hard for me, for Diana, for a lot of people, because there are these expectations and there are these habits that are already happening for a lot of leaders. Like a lot of leaders that are put into formal positions of power, managerial kind of roles, right? They get promoted because they were good at their last job.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is their last job skills are not necessarily what they need in their next job. But we don't necessarily train them on those next skills. We're like, just you're promoted. You're now the leader. You are responsible for all of them doing this. Well, for me, I was like, well, I know how to handle getting things done. I don't know how to help other people get things done. So a lot of times I would overinflate my value of my previous skill set. Well, because I can take that keyboard and code that thing, then I'm a good leader. And it's like, oh no, actually, it is not a good thing sometimes. And we wanted to just kind of address this. Like, not only are you going to feel like that's your value add, because that's what you've known is that previous skill set. That's your comfort. That's your way to not feel like an imposter. That's your value add. That's what you've built your career on so far. You're going to have a draw to that. In addition, the organization is likely going to be like, well, you are the expert. You should know everything. And
Sure.
you don't scale. You can't scale. And in fact, the more you try to do that, the more you are limiting. I often say the only thing stopping a team from becoming the next level of performance is the leader. Because if you can get a team collaborating, if you can get a team kind of starting to own that shared ownership, you're really the hub that's kind of stopping that next level of scaling, that next level of performance, that next level of thing, because your desires as a leader, your comfort as a leader, and then the organization's expectations. I mean, I cannot even count the number of times somebody was like, well, you're the manager of the team, you should know everything. I'm like, why?
Right.
What that you mean to tell me I'm supposed to be working 80 hours a week because I have 8 different people? I mean, like, it doesn't, if you really break it down, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And yet traditional management says that's what's expected because that's a control, and it's all centered on task-based work, not that discovery of value work.
Okay. And so I wonder, thinking about this a little bit, if it goes, so HBR, Harvard Business Review podcast had some of the greatest influential leadership discoveries of the last however long. And one of them, I think, was, if I remember, scientific management. And if I remember, for those unfamiliar, I think it goes back almost 150 years, right? It's around manufacturing. And it is interesting to visualize the manager, the supervisor, watches others do their work and is supposed to know better than them how they should do their work, right? And it almost strikes, as I'm hearing you talk about these traditional historical expectations of a manager, that the roots are in that, and that it doesn't apply to a lot of knowledge work particularly, right?
Yeah. And I don't knock some of those practices. Like I mean, I'll knock scientific management for specific things, but on other things for task-based work, there was a reason it became common, right? And it did work in certain scenarios. And that's why I'm like, groups work in certain scenarios and for certain types of work. The problem is we took it and didn't acknowledge that there were 2 different types of work. And even in like project management, like the poor person who built a bridge 17 times in Texas and was lauded as this amazing project manager, and then tried to build the same bridge in Michigan and was destroyed. Well, because once you're building the bridge in Michigan, it's knowledge work. It's no longer task work, different weather, different climate, different things. But yet we go, whoa, why did you control it, project manager? It's like, no, like that. In fact, the more you try to control it, the more likely you are going to deliver a crappy bridge.
So a lot of this it's really clicking in my mind here. It's really important that we know the type of work we're doing.
Absolutely.
Right? It's not just teams are amazing. It's superior. It's understanding, if I'm doing task-based work, what kind of work am I doing, and understanding where the most valuable configuration of our people lie in order to get the best results for that, right?
What they need in terms of an environment. Yep.
Great. One of the other fallacies I wanted to touch on, there are a lot of them I could ask about, but I just have 2 I had written down. And this is one that to me does seem kind of related to a leader knowing everything, but maybe not so obviously. It is fallacy. Everything can and should be more efficient. Now, if I understand correctly, you slap me virtually if I'm wrong. Efficiency is doing something fast, and effectiveness is doing something well. Close?
Yes, that's
Okay.
the general summarization people will have. I add to it a little bit. I struggle with people that are like, well, just do it fast. And I'm like, but is it really efficient if it's wrong? Even if it's fast, is it really efficient if it's not effective?
Yeah, first order fast, second order very expensive.
Like, so I don't care how fast you're going if it's still wrong. And is that really efficient? Because now I got to either go back and do rework, or now I got to go back, or we just destroyed a market, or we made our customers. So I think in a lot of times we have to really be careful with our definition of efficiency of just going fast as a reward, because fast without effectiveness isn't efficient.
That's great. Thanks for adding that on. So let's talk about efficiency. Maybe I'm misreading our situation here, at least in the US, but I feel like we're obsessed with efficiency.
Oh, we are so obsessed.
And what you're talking about, collaboration, sounds very messy, Tricia. I mean, this sounds very expensive.
We don't have time for that, Tricia.
It's not efficient, is it?
Well, and this goes back to that dynamic of, I always love it when somebody says this to me. But it's like, we don't have time to focus on the team, Tricia. We got to get to work. Who does the work?
Mm-hmm.
The team. You don't have time not to focus on the team because you don't get the work that you truly need and want without the team. Yeah. And it's that same concept of we don't have time for learning. You don't have time not to learn. You don't have like this efficiency dynamic when you disassociate it from the effectiveness creates just horrible results. But we can all say we delivered on time.
Sure.
And nobody uses it. My name is Tricia Broderick. I built code that met requirements, was on time, under budget, only to never be used. Doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
I love Alistair Coburn once said, we got into software development to solve hard problems. You can't take the problem away and only make people go fast.
Yeah, no, that's great insight to bring. Again, it sounds very difficult to embrace, right? This
all
mindset.
The pressures, all the momentum tells you not to. Yeah. All the processes, many processes, many structures, many expectations in organizations centered around task-based work, because in task-based work, that is your focus. How do you go faster because you already know the value. So all that momentum, and really when you break down the Agile Manifesto, the items on the right and the values, all centered for task-based work. The items on the left are for discovery of value. And so that's why some people are always like, well, how are the values so, obvious? And yet they are obvious. And yet all the momentum in organizations are on the items on the right. They are on the contracts. They are on the processes. They are on those dynamics, plans. And so to truly value the items on the left, to truly value those, it's hard. Like I always say, like you'll meet a true agilist when they realize they had the moment when they went, oh, we can say these values, but living them in an organization, really, really tough because all that momentum is on the right.
Okay. Thanks for calling that out. I'm sure a lot of people, if they really process, so you were originally a software engineer, right? When you came into the workforce, and you're speaking about Agile Manifesto, which was designed for software development and learning from building software. And for those who want to go check it out, who aren't familiar, you can find two halves of statements kind of in this manifesto. And if you want to all check it out, but you're saying some really powerful things that I think will resonate, especially with people already familiar with Agile software building and like, what am I really doing as opposed to what the words might be?
Yeah. And let me give a specific example.
Let's do that.
You said you're not in the Agile things. So one of the values is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. I was leading up an area of project management at a large organization. They told me after I hired on that I have to approve 3 manager level approvals of somebody purchasing a book. And I was like, why do we need 3 managers to approve a $25 book purchase? And they're like, well, because one time 7 years ago, someone bought a $500 book. And I'm like, but now we buy a $500 book every time with the hidden cost of these 3 approvals every single time. But it gives people that comfort, that process. Well, it will avoid any issues. And they don't necessarily always think about all the additional issues that we're creating with that process and how we are stripping people of that autonomy and that ownership, which then makes people go, well, if they don't even trust me to buy a $25 book, how are they trusting me to deliver this work? Trusting me to do my job? And I'm not saying there's no value in process. No, absolutely there's value. But is it really serving individuals and interactions, that collaboration, or is it giving everybody a false sense of security and control? And we center so much in organizations around that false sense of security and control that's where all the momentum goes. So we start hyper focusing on efficiency regardless of effectiveness.
Yeah, once again, thanks. I think you're saying just a lot of things that if people really start to think about their work environments, they'll go, oh, okay.
I don't really want to drive anybody to drink, like, though that's not like I use this video in my class a lot where you see this guy scraping snow off a car and he gets all the way done. He has a miserable time in the video doing it. And then he gets to the end and he goes to unlock his car and it's the wrong car he just scraped. And I do think, and I want to play that video for people that's out there like, what's the big deal? And everybody like myself from Michigan and Chicago area, they're right. Ah! Right. Yeah. But I do think people are tired. They're working really, really hard. They have really, really good intentions, but they don't get to be effective. And that's really what drove some of the resilient learning dynamic is like, at the end of the day, going through the motions won't make you scrape the right car. And people want to. We just have to create the right environments where we let them.
We haven't really talked about, in depth yet here about what it really means to be a resilient learning team. And one of the big word in the title here is blame. Okay. Yeah. So you talk early in the book, in particular, about breaking free from blame. What does that mean? What does that look like?
When Diane and I went back and forth, they're like, is this title going to cause people to walk away? Because I genuinely believe that I know everybody's going to be like, Tricia, I know this person, but I genuinely believe there are not many leaders walking around going, who can I blame today? Like, I genuinely do not think that people are doing that. And yet, when you walk around an organization, there's blame all over the place. And so what we wanted to really talk about why that was happening, it really builds off of what we've been talking about. It's like that false sense of control, that false sense of security, that belief that if you control it enough, you're just going to execute and deliver. And so if somebody makes a mistake, we have to figure out what the mistake was so we never do that mistake again. And half the time we're wasting a lot of time because you couldn't have avoided that mistake. And even if you could, that doesn't mean that the next person is going to really be able to, because who knows what the conditions are going to be in that. And we're not saying you can't learn. Like, people are like, oh, so we should just not care at all. And I'm like, no. It's a matter of really putting the effort and the time towards what you can learn, not what you can pretend that you can avoid. And by changing that mindset, by thinking about it in terms of how does this help us move forward and what can we do, the need that people have to finger point, the need that people have to protect, the need that people have to doing any of that just starts to diminish because it's just not the purpose. But when you go in trying to go, how could we have avoided this? And it's a mistake that somebody made, we got to figure out the mistake. Now you're in a place where everybody's like, oh my God, I just wanted to scrape the right car. Like, and no one is going to be their best creative self in that kind of environment. And so what we're talking about with breaking free of blame is really letting go of some of those fallacies, letting go of the revisionist history where you thought you could just control it. Because how's it working out for you? Like it's not working right now. And yet we keep trying harder to control it. And so, and instead embracing the learning for what that does help us move forward, but not put people in a psychologically unsafe situation.
What do we do to start moving forward towards creating a more psychologically safe environment where we can learn rather than blame?
Yeah. Now, I realize the irony in that I wrote a book, but there is no one checklist. And that's what we do call out in the book too. Like, if you're looking, and trust me, I tried finding one. I did. but every team is different. Every organization is different. Every person is different. And so there isn't just this like automatic step that you have to do. What we instead highlighted and kind of said is like, you have to think about the environment as that learning leader and going, what needs to be true in the environment that's going to promote less blame, more learning. And so we really went with like, you need to be focusing on what we call the essential motivators. And then also the resilience factors, and what order you do those in and what ways you do those can vary. But like, if those things are not solid, you will not move into that resilient learning kind of environment. But there is no chronological. So we wrote the book a little bit of okay, we're going to really focus on conflict and just dive into that part of the book, and versus somebody that's like, oh, we really have to work on one of the essential motivators, and because there is no pure order, no checklist for it.
One of the parts I love in the book is, for anyone listening here, it could just be worth it almost to get the very specifically mapped out retrospectives and meeting facilitation tactics that you all put in here for someone who might be like, okay, I just want to do one action that could enable moving forward in the right direction. What do I even do? And retrospectives, as you all call out in the book, something that is looking back on how a team is working together, but it's really not been adopted outside of software nearly as much as it probably could be. Probably any team can retrospect, but when it comes to building resilience within your team, why is a retrospective so important?
Yeah. So honestly, in some ways, retrospectives are existing outside of software. They call them lessons learned. They call them postmortems, which is a horrible name after death.
I know,
right?
Like
seriously, who does that meeting? But the problem is most of the time, again, to comment earlier, you're walking into those going, what will we avoid next time? Which is just not, you're spending a lot of time trying to think of some of the things you're going to avoid. And then the problem is you're going to try so desperately to avoid those things that you might actually be creating new problems because you're avoiding something that would have worked for this side. So they do exist outside of software. We wanted to build off of obviously Diana's work and Esther Derby's work in Agile retrospectives. We decided like with this, although we couldn't give people a checklist, we definitely did want to go, here's an actual design of a retrospective we would run that would focus on helping the team to have a conversation about conflict.
Yeah, good.
And because you don't want to go through the motions, I literally sat in a retrospective that was like, what did we do well? Communication. What are we going to improve? Communication. What are we going to do? Communicate more. I'm like, oh my gosh, just shoot me. Like that is just, and that was and it wasn't just the notes for one retro. It was like 3 retros in a row. And I was like, I can't. And, but I think the reality is it is scary for people to talk about conflict or talk about power dynamics or talk about these things so we wanted to give people an example design, not like the sole design for doing it, but a full blown timing example design in the book with it, to where at the end of the day, to build these resilient learning teams, you don't get to just tell them they're a resilient learning team. You have to help them collaborate. You have to help them have these conversations. You have to help them deal with these dynamics and these factors that can derail a team's togetherness and create the right environment where these discussions can happen. But you got to build up to it, right? And not just start off like, today we're going to talk about conflict. You've never been in a retro before. Like you're going to panic people, right? But we wanted to provide a little bit of tangible examples with it, because this stuff is hard. People are always like, oh, it's so scary to talk about conflict. It's scary to facilitate a conversation about conflict in a team. And so if you're not learning how to do those skills well, it's going to be harder to help your team engage in those discussions. And so that was the motivation behind it. Although there were times that we're like, should we put that in the back of the book? And we're like, no, it's right there. And we're just going to incorporate it with each chapter as we're going forward.
No, that's great. Thanks. And also thanks for calling out the lessons learned and postmortems and things. Last year, I had the fortune of speaking to Maria Okerlund, who is the co-author of the 6th edition of Creating Effective Teams. And they did a meta-analysis on teams that do reflect and look at their work. And they, have quantified it, that they're like 35% more effective. But as you're saying, she also echoed this comment that you don't just start there. You have to be building. Trust is an overused word maybe, but you're building things within your team. I love that way we bring in this back together. If I'm the leader of a self-organizing team, what do I do now? Right? Well, yeah.
Well, your job's just beginning, sir. Because there's a lot of things that at that point we are delivering, we are getting things done, but that's not the full potential. And that took me a long time to kind of realize, because I was like, what? My team's great. And I was like, oh, we are avoiding that topic. And that does have an impact in terms of what we produce.
Well, we're coming to a close here, Tricia.
Oh my goodness.
I know. Can you believe how fast? I'd encourage everybody to check out the book. I have it here in my hand and on Audible, just so you know. There's a lot to be learned from reading through this book, and I think a lot resonates with people in their different work environments. So I'd encourage folks to check it out. Before we close it out, I'll ask you the question I ask everyone, which is, what is something you've learned recently?
Okay, well, the first thing that popped in my head is not a business related thing, but I'm going to still say it because I'm super proud of it, that I'm still working on it. And then I'll think of a business related one. My goal for 2023 is to learn how to do a handstand.
Oh, wow.
I am making progress, but it is slow. And I was super happy. Like a week ago, I held a handstand for like 3.5, 4 seconds. Have not been able to do it again since, but progress, right? So I am actively like trying to learn that, right? That's my personal big learn for 2023.
I will just jump in and maybe buy you 5 more seconds to think. What I will say is hands down, coolest answer I've ever heard so far. Thank you.
It just genuinely is like the first thing that I'm doing. And I'm laughing because I do post my progress like once at the end of each month. I reflect on my progress. But work-wise, I am learning. I actually did a session yesterday. People have this impression of me. She's been on the Agile Alliance board of directors. She's been an executive. She speaks internationally. She's a book author. She's all these things. And I'm extremely extroverted. I know that was shocking. I mean, I know. I just surprised you right there. But and I'm often very vulnerable. Like anything people are willing to go, I try to be as vulnerable and authentic because I have the privilege to say things that maybe some others don't have. And I really take to heart that responsibility and what that means. But I am currently learning just how much my own imposter syndrome holds me back, and in ways that I have to really embrace my courage in ways that surprise people because they're like, you just literally said it. I'm like, yeah, but I know what I'm saying and I'm willing to be vulnerable about that. And then there's this where I was terrified to write this book. I was like, oh, what if people hate it? What if I destroy Diana's career, like and reputation? Like, I mean, just absolutely terrified. And yet I challenged myself because I was not going to pass down this opportunity to work with Diana, but also to pay forward what other people have helped me with. But it's hard. And I am still trying to learn, especially as now an independent with my own company, how do I not let that imposter syndrome hold me back and really see what else is potential and what else is out there. And that is something I am actively learning about and doing and finding tips for myself and what helps and what doesn't and working on it.
Well, thanks for being vulnerable and sharing that with us. That's great. Thank you. in your own words, the extremely extroverted Tricia Broderick. There's a reason I'm on this side of the microphone and you're on that side. No, for those who are interested, Tricia, in either your book, services, however you want to answer it, where would you like to direct them?
My website's probably best at igniteii.com. LinkedIn is also, I go live once a month. Actually now twice, because Diane and I also go live once a month for Lead Without Blame. I roped her into that.
Cool. That's great.
But LinkedIn is the other way to really easily reach me. I technically am on Twitter, but not really. And I'm trying to get on Mastodon, but it's not my go-to. So LinkedIn and my website are probably the best ways to reach me.
That sounds good. igniteii.com, right?
Correct.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for sharing some of your time, Tricia. It's been a pleasure for me to talk to you, and I know that others will get a lot out of our discussion and ultimately out of the book as well. So thank you so much today.
Thank you for having me.
Time for your episode recap. Thanks for sticking through that conversation with Tricia Broderick. What did we talk about today with Tricia? Before we get to that, as a reminder, the show's website is leadership.voyage. You can reach me, Jason Wick, at startyourvoyage@gmail.com. And last but certainly not least, listen to the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. Rate, review, and subscribe. If you want to help spread the message and help make others even better leaders, please rate, review, and subscribe. So with Tricia today, we talked about the difference between groups and teams. Groups and teams are indeed different. Groups are cooperative, willing to work together, and reactively supportive, where teams are collaborative. They feel a sense of shared ownership and are proactively supportive. Groups are just fine for task-based work. There's nothing inferior about groups. But teams are better when we need to discover value amidst complex circumstances. Most organizations are structured for group-based work without truly acknowledging the differences in the types of work. We talked about leaders and how they shouldn't have all the answers. Not just that they may not have them, but they shouldn't have them. Most people are promoted into their leadership position because of the skills they had in their last job. You can't scale yourself, and leaders are the bottleneck to high performance. Organizations will often look at the leader as the person who should be the expert, but really they're helping their teams get together to collaborate. We had a really interesting conversation in this discussion about efficiency versus effectiveness. Efficiency is doing something fast, but what if it's fast and wrong? Effectiveness is doing something well. Collaboration is not efficient. You have to take the time for the team. You have to take the time for learning. And finally, we talked about resilient learning teams. People don't come to work trying to blame. We do believe that. But there's blame all over in organizations. And that's because the momentum in organizations is looking for a false sense of control. Instead, put effort into what you can learn, not what you falsely believe you can avoid. There is no checklist that creates the safe environment to build a resilient learning team, but to promote learning, focus on essential motivators and resilience factors. There's your episode recap, Season 2, Episode 6 of Leadership Voyage. Take care.